The wheels of the carriage rattled against the cobblestones as Joseph leaned slightly toward the window, his eyes fixed on the looming silhouette of his family's estate. The tall stone walls, the sweeping garden paths, the grand doors. It was all the same as when he was a boy. A rush of memories pressed against him, both sweet and heavy. The carriage slowed, finally halting before the gates. Joseph stepped down, the faint crunch of gravel beneath his boots. The driver gave a small nod and said with warmth, "Welcome back home, Dr. Joseph." Joseph smiled faintly, as if the words carried both comfort and weight, then turned toward the long path. The gardens stretched on either side, familiar roses and clipped hedges guiding him to the door he had not crossed in years. He raised his hand and knocked. The door opened, and there stood his mother. For a moment, she only stared, her breath caught in her chest. Then her composure broke, tears brimming as she pulled him into her arms. "Joseph, you came. You truly came." Her voice trembled with both relief and disbelief. Inside, the house felt unchanged, every detail carrying the scent of memory. Joseph sat down in his old chair in the living room, the one that had always been his place, and for a moment he let the familiarity settle over him like a blanket. Then light footsteps came from the staircase. His younger sister appeared, brow furrowed with curiosity at the voices. When her eyes fell on him, she froze. "Joseph?" It was hardly a whisper. She rushed forward, almost stumbling, and threw her arms around him. "It's really you." Joseph held her tightly, the warmth of her embrace stirring something deep within him, something he hadn't expected. Pride. Not the pride of titles or profession, but the quiet pride of belonging. His family was glad he had returned, perhaps proud he was now a doctor, perhaps simply proud that he was theirs. The evening unfolded with laughter and talk. Joseph shared stories of the cities he had wandered, the seas he had crossed, the strange wonders he had seen. His sister listened wide-eyed, clinging to every word, and when he promised, "One day I'll take you with me to see it all," her smile lit the room. It was a happy moment, almost perfect, but beneath it all, Joseph felt it, an unease that lingered like a shadow in the corner of the room. Something was not right. The sound of laughter fills the warm dining room. Joseph sits across from his mother and sister, the table crowded with plates of roasted meats, fresh bread, and wine. For a fleeting moment, it feels as if the years apart never happened. But then, Joseph's gaze drifts, his expression tightening. Something feels absent. He lowers his cup slowly. "Where's Father, Mother?" "I haven't seen him since I arrived," Joseph said quietly. His mother's smile falters. She exhales, her eyes flicking downward as if the question itself carries weight she's tried to escape. "He's at the hospital, Joseph. We can go see him today. I was just so happy to see you again, I forgot everything else." "I missed you," Joseph said, "and him most of all." At this, his sister lowers her gaze, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her dress. She hasn't spoken since the laughter faded. A sadness lingers in her eyes, as if she knows more than she dares to say. They continue the meal in silence, broken only by the clink of cutlery. Each smile feels thinner now, each bite harder to swallow. Later, the family steps out, Joseph helping his mother into a black, polished carriage drawn by 2 horses. His sister follows quietly. Joseph pauses a moment before climbing in, his eyes fixed on the road ahead, his jaw set. The wheels rattle softly against the cobblestones. Through the window, Paris rushes by, its grandeur dimmed by the weight pressing on Joseph's chest. He stares out, lost in thought. What if I am too late? Joseph thought. What if the man I once knew is already gone? He clenches his hand against his knee. His reflection in the window looks older, burdened, haunted by duty and love intertwined. His mother watches him with quiet worry. His sister sits stiffly, biting her lip as if some truth presses against her throat but refuses to escape. The carriage speeds toward the looming silhouette of the hospital, its white walls rising above the city like a fortress of sorrow. Joseph exhales slowly. His heart pounds louder with every turn of the wheels. Joseph arrived at the hospital, his steps heavy as he walked down the long hallways, weighed down by worry. From the other side, a nurse appeared. "I'm looking for Monsieur Lapointe," Joseph said. The nurse froze, her hands tightening on the papers she carried. She looked uneasy, her eyes flicking away. "Is something wrong?" Joseph asked. The nurse hesitated, then bowed her head slightly. "One moment, I'll fetch the doctor." A doctor soon approached, his coat brushing against the walls as he walked with steady steps. "You're his son," the doctor said quietly. "Come with me." He led Joseph through the corridors. All the while, his mother and sister stayed silent, their faces pale, their lips pressed shut. At last, they arrived at his father's door. Joseph placed his hand on the handle, pushed it open, and stepped inside. The room was dark and silent, the only sound the faint creak of the door. In the center, a bed stood, and upon it lay a man, motionless. Joseph froze, confused, his chest tightening. Slowly, he stepped toward the bed until he was standing right beside his father. "What's wrong with him?" Joseph asked, his voice trembling. His mother's eyes filled with tears. She hesitated, clasping her hands together as if to stop them from shaking. "He has been very ill," his mother said softly. "The doctors have tried everything." "Every day we prayed for a change," she swallowed, her voice breaking. "Sometimes I sat here for hours talking to him, hoping he would hear me, hoping he would come back to us." She looked at Joseph, the weight of the truth trembling in her lips. "He has been in a coma for more than a year, Joseph," she whispered. Shock struck him like a blow. Words failed him. Regret filled his heart, every moment away from his family pressing down on him. Joseph sank into the chair beside the bed, taking his father's hand into his own. His eyes burned, holding back tears. His mother and sister began to weep quietly, watching him, uncertain if the man they loved would ever wake again. They left the hospital with silence carved deep into their faces. Not a word was spoken on the ride home, each of them carrying the same fear, that the man who had carried this family on his back for decades might never open his eyes again. The next morning, Joseph rose early. His body moved as if on habit, but his heart still carried the heaviness of the night before. He washed his face, brushed his teeth, and descended the grand staircase. In the kitchen, the quiet tick of the clock followed him as he poured himself a cup of coffee. He spooned in far too much sugar, staring at the way it dissolved, and for a moment Fiona's face flickered in his mind, her laughter, her warmth. Then his father's still face overtook it. His travels, his choices, his absences, all collided at once. A knock came at the door. sharp, unusual. The family rarely had visitors. Joseph set his cup down and walked slowly across the hall, unease already tightening his chest. He opened the door. A man stood there in a physician's robe, his expression grave. Behind him, a hospital carriage waited at the gates. Joseph's stomach dropped. His voice caught in his throat as he spoke. "What's wrong? Is everything all right?" The man hesitated, searching for words, but finally lowered his gaze. "Dr. Lapointe, I am very sorry to inform you, your father passed away this morning. We did everything we could, but there was no hope." The words fell like stones. Joseph's knees buckled, and he dropped to the floor, a sound escaping him that he hadn't made since he was a boy. His chest heaved, his breath ragged, grief pouring out in waves. The physician bent toward him, hand half raised in comfort, but Joseph pulled himself upright, swallowing the storm inside. His eyes glistened, his jaw trembling. "Thank you," he whispered hoarsely, and with a slow hand, he closed the door. He walked back into the parlor, back to the same chair where he had laughed with his family the day before. But the house was no longer warm. It felt hollow, every corner whispering with absence. Joseph sank into the chair, his hands covering his face. Tears spilled freely now. He blamed himself for every second he had wasted, every mile he had put between himself and this house. He longed for just one more chance to hear his father's voice, one more lesson, one more embrace. But all he had left was silence. The house that once carried laughter and warmth now felt hollow, filled with shadows of grief. Word of the father's passing spread quickly, and through the day visitors streamed in. Friends, neighbors, dignitaries, all offering condolences. Women from across Paris came to embrace Joseph's mother, a woman admired for her kindness and humility. Joseph stood at the door, greeting each mourner with bowed head and heavy heart. Every handshake, every whispered word of sympathy pressed deeper against his chest. He kept seeing his father's face, still lifeless, and the thought carved him hollow. By nightfall, the house grew quiet. Candles flickered against the walls, the air heavy with exhaustion. Joseph sat alone in the living room, slouched in the chair that had once been his father's. His eyes burned from tears that refused to dry. His mind drifted in circles, regret, sorrow, memories too heavy to bear. Then, outside, the faint creak of wheels, a carriage. Moments later, a knock. Soft, almost hesitant. Joseph's heart stilled. Something in the sound pulled him to his feet. Step by step, he crossed the silent hall and opened the door. There she was, Fiona. The world seemed to stop around her. Her presence felt unreal, a vision conjured from longing and despair. She stood in the dim glow of the carriage lamps, her eyes filled with concern, with love. Joseph's breath caught. Confusion swirled. How? Why? What brought her here? But none of it mattered. He stepped forward and pulled her into his arms. The embrace was desperate, clinging, as if he could drain the sadness of the past days through that single hold. He buried his face against her shoulder, trembling, while Fiona held him tighter. And in that moment, the sorrow did not vanish, but the weight shifted, carried now by two hearts instead of one.